Hello everybody and welcome to a new lag poker video. Today we are going to speak about the infamous red line. So the red line is the non-showdown winning line we see on the graphs of tracking softwares, and it tells us how much we win or lose when the hand doesn't get to showdown. If you sum it with the blue line, the showdown winnings line, you get your total profit, the green line. Many players struggle to have a winning red line, or anyway a decent one, and so I thought it was nice to make a video about that. I think the first thing to do is to understand how the red line goes up and down. It may be obvious to some of you, but I think it's important to have it in mind during all this video. So the more your opponents fold, the more your red line goes up, but also the less you fold, the more your red line goes up. Because, it is not just making your opponent fold. Every time you don't go to showdown in a pot you lose, that's bad. This also means that if you play like a nonsense monkey, like betting any straight and never folding to any bet or raise, your red line is going to be awesome. Not so much for your green line. It is important to not fall in the misconception that the higher the red line, the better it is, because if, for example, player A has a higher red line than player B, it doesn't necessarily mean that player A is playing better than player B. How high or low your red line should be depends mainly on the field you're playing. I'm going to repeat it again because this is a very important point. How your red line looks depends on how you play, but how your red line should look depends mainly on the field you're playing. Everybody can have an awesome red line, it's enough never to fold and always to bet, but it doesn't mean it is the correct choice in the field you're playing. As an example, during my bankroll challenge, I played the all stakes from an L10 to an L500 zoom, and it can be seen that my red line was much better at the lower stakes than it was at higher stakes. And I think that because of the field and because of the quality of my opponent. I'm not saying that my red line was correct in one or in the other field, I'm just saying that the same player will have different red lines in different fields. If you're not satisfied by your red line, there are two common issues that may affect your game and your red line, and I think it's worth to show them to you. The first one is that you may not be betting enough on one or more streets. Doesn't matter which street. Some people just focus on the river. I'm not bluffing enough on the river. Not necessarily. Even betting a lot on the flop is good for your red line, so check all the streets. And also keep in mind, I'm not speaking about bluffing or value betting. Both kind of bets are good for your red line, because even when you're value betting, your opponent will fold sometimes and your red line will go up. If you never value bet, you're going more frequently to showdown and your red line is going to be a bit worse. The second common issue is that you may be folding too much, even here on one or more streets. Same for the previous common issue. A lot of people just focus on the river. Well, maybe I'm folding too much on the river, while usually is not that the case. Usually they're folding more or too much on the flop or on the turn. And that's also, as we saw before, really important for the red line, because every time you fold, your red line goes down. As a consequence of that, I would also like to add two other, let's say, common issues that may affect your red line and you may not even think about. The first one is that you may be playing too loose in certain dynamics, because if you play too loose, it's going to be difficult to bet and call enough when you have a weak range. So your red line is likely going to be affected unless you are a calling station or a maniac. And another thing people do not think about is that maybe they are folding too much on the blind. If you fold too much the big blind or the small blind, keep in mind that this goes directly on your red line. Folding a big blind is minus 0.5 big blinds in your red line. So please keep in mind that folding too much is going to have some kind of effect on your red line. In general, I suggest you to focus a lot more on the small pots, because that's where usually a bad red line comes from. Speaking of my personal experience, I'd have a mediocre bad red line for the first part of my career, I was already a winning player, I didn't have bad big blinds at all, but my red line was pretty bad. At a certain point I started focusing a bit more on that, and I remember I was reading a book. It was named, I think it was Poker's 1% by Ed Miller, and there was one paragraph which stuck on my mind, and what I started doing there was that I just started playing my draws more aggressively, maybe even too much aggressively, but from that moment on, my red line became much, much better. Basically, what I did was changing my plan A for a hand when I had a draw, and rather than trying to hit my hand as plan A, my plan A became trying to make my opponent fold, and if he doesn't fold, my plan B would be to hit my hand. I know it sounds a bit silly because it's a pretty simple thing to do, but back then it had a huge improvement on my red line. I'm not saying that it's gonna be the same for you, because chances are you may have other problems in your red line and maybe you're doing that correct, but that was work for me, and for every player it's the same. Also, I'm not saying that that adjustment was necessarily correct, because maybe I started doing it a bit too much, and I remember my red line was very nice. It was higher than my blue line, which is not necessarily what you want to do in your game. So now I'd like to draw some conclusions on this video, and the first one is that you should probably do not be obsessed with the red line. The green one is the one which matters, and maybe in the field you're playing it's not even optimal to have a winning red line. In general, it is easier to win by red line in a tight passive field, while it is harder to win by red line in a loose aggressive field. Because keep in mind, once again, that the way you play dictates your red line, but the way your player pool plays dictates how your red line should be in an optimal way. And also, assuming you really have some red line issue, keep in mind that there is no easy fix. As we saw, there are many things and many streets you may get wrong in a poker game. So if you think you might have a red line problem, just focus on each potential issue one by one, because more often than not, is not just one thing you're doing wrong which affects your red line, but it's a lot of minor things which summed up together have that effect. So just try to focus one thing at a time and you will see it's going to get better.